Okay. Well, let's begin the Nantucket Conservation Commission meeting for June 15th, 2016. A couple of announcements. Please turn off your cell phones and take any extraneous conversations out into the hall. We are going to be recording this meeting, and if you record any or part of the meeting, please let us know before you start recording. We'll go to the public meeting, public comment. Anything from the public on matters that aren't before the commission tonight? Seeing that, we'll go to the public meeting. Just a couple of items. In the minor mods, the Danheim at 97 Low Beach Road was withdrawn, and in the certificates of compliance, 4 Saratoga at 14 Tennessee Avenue was continued until the 29th. Everything else is going forward. So we'll go to notices of intent, haul over at 165 Wallwinter Road.
Jeff Blackwell for the applicant. At the first public hearing, some questions were raised about whether the ramp that leads to the main catwalk might be obstructing passage of sand flow, and I printed out a couple of these just for those are easy to see. So I went back out and took some photographs up underneath the ramp, and in one of them you can see that not only is there any sand accumulating below the ramp, you can actually see daylight through the very beginning of the ramp where its elevation above grade approaches zero. And there's no vegetative difference between below the ramp or around the ramp. It's all bare sand. So I believe that the ramp is not creating a blockage in the passage of sand, and that it just provides an easier way for the owner who is aging to get up onto the main catwalk and make their way to the beach. And I included a picture that has my dog in it in a shameless attempt to get whatever mileage I can out of my dog.
That did it.
There you go, I admit it.
I think there was some question as to this skirt, or what do you call that? Whether that was lower than the,
No, you
what the picture said, it's not any lower than the framing, so.
Maybe,
much better these photos than the other. It was deceiving. It looked like it was laying on
yeah.
sand for the most part.
No, it looks good.
Any other questions? Well, in that case, you ready to close, Jeff?
Yes.
Jeff, do we have everything we need to close?
Yes.
Do I have a motion?
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Adele and Alderson at 8 High Brush Paths. Excuse me.
Ryan Madden from LEC Environmental Consultants, representing the applicants. At the last meeting, I believe Don had indicated that there was going to be some landscaping changes, which are shown on the revised plan. Basically, the pool and the patio shifting further away from the resource areas, so the pool kind of overlaps the existing driveway out to the garage out back. So there's been some minimal updates associated with that, the landscaping, grading. Also, the loop driveway is now being proposed to be retained Previously, it was just going to be a short parking court, and then the back end was going to be abandoned, but they do want to keep that. And there's just been some slight modifications for like the septic tank out front. But the leach field is still outside of 100 feet. And I think at the last meeting that there was some discussion about replanting some of the lawn areas within the delineated wetland. So we are proposing to replant that area with high bush blueberry, Irwin, and bayberry.
Down there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's about it.
Are there any other questions? Okay, Brian, you ready to close? Jeff, do we have what we need to close?
Yes, sir.
Do I have a motion to close the hearing?
Motion to close.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Okay, Beach Nut LLC at 14A Crow's Nest Way.
Paul.
Bill in for Paul? You said David was gonna be here. Ken? Oh. David's here. Morning, Paul.
Drew, with Nantucket Surveyors. The application, so the proposed raising of an existing building and construction of a new dwelling, guest house, garage, pool, and pool house, and a new septic system, relocation of the existing driveway, and just associated grading and landscaping.
There was an order of conditions for doing work on the existing house. The resource area is obviously the ocean, a beach, a coastal dune across here. And now, I think that's expired, and it's a new owner, and he wants to remove the existing house, as he said, and build new ones outside of 50. I noticed the inspection report from Bruce indicated that we needed to ask for a waiver to remove the old house, because that was inside of 50. I don't know if that's been taken care of or not. But we are asking for that waiver to do that work. And obviously, there's no other feasible alternative to be able to remove the house. You have to look inside of it.
Why did this get held over? I think when Paul presented the same thing, was it? Were there any changes
There
or
was
waiting for natural
Heritage.
Yes.
Okay.
And natural heritage, from what I understand,
Yes.
signed off on it.
Were there questions about, like, the changes in percent coverage? I can't remember.
It's more of a, like, driveway relocating.
Well, or with like, like percent development within our jurisdiction, you know, that change.
Oh, and it was in the 25.
Yeah.
So that, it did come up at the last meeting. That percentage is only relative to the buffer zone from the bordering vegetated wetland for the area between the 50 and the 25. It doesn't meet that, and then, not for nothing, this is where, thinking about the waiver request to do the work inside the 50, is they're not, Bruce and I disagree on this sometimes, is they're not doing structural work other than removing structure within the 50. I personally find that demolition is more of an activity inside the buffer zone and not constructing the structure. So we could certainly grant a waiver if you feel it is better or necessary. I think the removal of structure from there is something that would be in keeping with the regulations. I mean, I think if you're looking at it as an overall net benefit for a structural decrease in buffer zones, that can be something contemplated in a waiver. But I don't think that being the sole waiver activity would necessarily, I personally don't think it necessarily requires the waiver to do the work, since there's no structure that will be left. And it going back to vegetation would be compliant with the 25-foot setback, which wouldn't require the waiver to do. So you can go either.
That's a good question. I think we've typically asked for waivers, and usually under a long-term net benefit.
Yeah, I don't think you couldn't. You could certainly grant them, but I guess my opinion is that it's not 100% necessary.
If we do regs hearings, maybe we could sort of codify that under our local regs, that,
I mean, to me, we should be encouraging the removal of structures from within those areas and not saying you need a waiver to do it, because then people could say, well, we're just going to keep it. So,
Do the regulations say placement of a structure or work on a structure?
no, the regulations
probably say work within.
it just says a structure within 50 feet. I always have taken that to be construction. Grab the wrong folder. I think it's kind of germane to this one, but
And it looks like, I think this driveway was, the driveway?
You moved it.
You moved it, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so you requested that.
Is this like a wood decking around the pool?
That's just fencing. This is fencing, and then it's just patio.
yeah. So just to beat this into the ground, I mean, the way that like the coastal dune performance standards read is all projects which are not water dependent shall maintain at least a 25-foot natural undisturbed area adjacent to a coastal dune. All structures which are not water dependent shall be at least 50 feet from a coastal dune. I would consider demolition to be a project, not a structure, because you're
Yeah, I
ending
think you're right,
without
yeah.
a structure. My thought. I know Bruce and I have argued about this many times, so
We'd be arguing about worse things.
we do that too. So. But I agree, it may be something when we open up regs again to qualify that removal of structures doesn't require, that would be considered to be a activity and not a structure.
I do have to say, this is a sensitive area. The amount of construction is unfortunate. Because you're going to have to take every piece of vegetation off of this lot. So,
Except for near the resource areas, and the 25-foot will all remain or be restored. This area is already in the driveway, so this area, this no disturb would remain.
it's just a heavily vegetated area. And I think it'll certainly have an impact.
The 100-foot buffer zone ends here, and then, well, also there, excuse me. So it's,
Yeah, there's a couple on the side.
this is a
That
nice,
again is
this is a
something
vegetated
we
wetland.
We'll have to discuss more in terms of
The regs.
changing regs,
Yeah.
because we don't really have jurisdiction against. But I agree, it's unfortunate to see the lots get totally, I mean, it's just the Nantucket way they do things. They strip the whole lot down to subsoil and start over. It's too bad, but
Right, and I mean, that will certainly impact water flow through there. Yeah, no question.
well, if there's any other questions, anything from the public, haven't been asking that lately. Well, in that case, ready to close. Jeff, do we have what we need to close the hearing now?
Yes.
Do I have a motion to close?
Move to close?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously.
Nice to meet you, Drew.
The 3 Beacon Lane nominee trust at 3 Beacon Lane.
Do you guys know what this site looks like? Beacon Lane? I mean,
Mr. Chairman, I was hoping for Natural Heritage sign-off. They have till tomorrow, and I hadn't heard from them.
Oh, Jeff, did you hear anything from Heritage?
Unless there was
No.
something that you or
Sorry.
Jeff felt like you needed to, wanted to discuss. discuss. The only thing I submitted was the additional information of the landscape plan. I colored the same plan from last time. Be happy to discuss it if you wanted to, or if you'd prefer to wait for next time when we have to sign off, I hope, from Natural Heritage, that you have preference.
Or there'll be past time, either way.
Well, if there's nothing to bring up, we'll just, unless I have an objection.
Thank you.
Art, one thing, just
Oh, wait, I guess.
bookkeep, or housekeeping order, at the beginning in the site description, it says, I think two things got mixed up. This property is located in the Brant Point area.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
That's all right.
Wait, which one?
Okay, so we'll continue this to, what is it, the 29th? On our next
Yes.
meeting? Okay. Thanks, Art. Okay, the Leary Family Realty Company, LLC at 7 Mass Ave.
Good evening, David Haynes for the applicant. This is a slightly interesting one. It's good, I think. This is out on Smith's Point. It has it's for a well replacement and installation of a tight tank. Currently, there's a septic system right here that has a leach field that's out on the, closer to the salt marsh. The resource area is a salt marsh. Along here, out in the back of the property, and also it's all land subject to coastal storm flowage. So there's an existing septic system here with a leach field out going towards the salt marsh. There's an existing well in a little pump house right next to the house. That well has failed. And so what I'm here to ask for is to install a new well and replace the septic system with a tight tank. Because the well had completely failed and there's no water to the house, we asked also to ask as an emergency situation and got a well permit and got an emergency permit signed by Jeff on Friday. And so as of today, the well has been installed. And so it's not quite an after the fact because it was done legally.
So,
But now
just real quickly, that emergency was, that well was ordered and installed by the Board of Health. So, our emergency requirements require that a different public agency order the emergency, or it essentially has to be an overwhelming emergency to public health or public safety. A private well is never that case. But with it ordered from the health department, we are obliged to comply to their emergency. So,
So it is after the fact, but it's legally after the fact. We did have a permit to do it. But the well is being relocated over to this position, right, or has been relocated right along the road up here. The existing septic tank will be pumped and left in place to minimize disturbance of the lot. A new proposed tight tank will be installed over in this area next to the road. Plumbing will be redirected to that area. During construction, it's highly probable it's going to require dewatering. So we've shown a dewatering area where it's scarified. There isn't much topsoil out there, so it really isn't that necessary. But to create a little basin in there, and then surround it with silt fence and hay bales, or silt fence and straw wattles, and then pump into that from a hole, from a pit in the excavation, with a mud pump in it, surrounded by stone, so to minimize what goes in there, and then monitor the water quality and make sure none goes out and goes into the wetland.
Yeah, into the well.
Mm-hmm.
Or into the well.
Well, yeah, into the well. We don't want it to go into the well either. But it's right at the 100-foot line, but it's still within land subject to coastal storm flowage. But, and so that's basically the project. All areas, disturbed areas will be re-loamed and seeded as necessary. There is a very large privet that the owner would like to retain. I didn't tell her that we don't really care for privet that much, but It's a very pretty
If
place.
it's there already, so.
Okay, any other questions? Anything from the public? Okay.
And are we also asking that the commission ratify the?
I'll do that later.
If you're ready to close.
I'm more than happy.
Jeff, do we have everything we need to
Yes.
close? Have a motion to close.
Motion to close.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
All right.
That carries unanimously.
Before we leave this section, amazingly enough, well, you guys were voting to continue. We received our sign off from Natural Heritage on Beacon Lane. So I would say, if you guys want to take that up, that would be fine, but I would make sure that there's no one here that objects to that before you.
Anybody in the
Open.
audience that objects to reopening this?
No one left, so that's why I asked.
Okay.
But that was the piece of information we're missing. In
So do we
amazingly
need a
enough.
motion to reopen it then, or how do we work it? Since we
I think
closed
you
it?
just,
Pick it back up again?
I would
Like a
just-
fumble or something? Pick it up and run?
I would, yeah, I would just reopen it. It's still part of the same open session.
Run, Ernie, run.
Okay, so let's go back then and look at this one again. So this is 3 Beacon Lane Nominee Trust.
Thank you, I appreciate the flexibility. This is, for the applicant, Art Gasparo, this is the project that I presented to you at the last meeting, which is for residential redevelopment of the property in Quidnet, Mount Grant Point. That fronts on Sackatchew Pond. There is an existing single-family dwelling served by on-site septic systems and wells. And we had, basically what we're looking to do is to move existing structures, I have little ones as well, remove them and construct new structures and landscaping within the buffer zone to a coastal bank, as well as border and vegetated wetland. The coastal bank is farther upland than the vegetated wetland, which essentially makes it the most restrictive resource area. So this time the plans are highlighted up for you, and in blue is the top of the coastal bank, and then in the lime color is the proposed silt fence limit of work, as well as the 20, it's coincident with the 25-foot no disturb buffer zone. And then in pink is the 50-foot buffer zone. And you can see from the lighter gray scaling, the existing structure is partially within the 50, and all new structures will be outside of the 50-foot buffer zone. So the only waiver, that we've requested for the project is for dewatering associated with, or actually the waiver would be related to the footings being within 2 feet of estimated seasonal high groundwater. And you can see that we've got a large area of the property back up here, which is outside of the jurisdiction of the commission, which is where any water would be pumped to from the excavations. The property will be served by a new on-site septic system and well. We've shown the proposed leach bed, which is also well outside of the 100-foot buffer zone from the top of the coastal bank. And we've included a fairly detailed landscape plan, again maintaining a 25-foot no disturb buffer zone, except for there's an existing footpath down to the pond, which would be maintained. And with that, I'd be happy to try to address questions or concerns that you might have with the project.
Well, I just want to remind everybody that Mass Audubon has a conservation restriction next door to this property. We don't have any fee interest in it. I was not planning on recusing, and I thought I'd ask Art if he has a problem with that.
We had, as with the last meeting, that's fine.
Okay, thanks. Any questions for Art?
I'm assuming these shrubs are getting planted
Mhm.
as part of this. What?
Again, most of that is outside, that's all outside the jurisdiction. As you can see, the jurisdiction is here. So it almost is
So
like,
right here.
yeah, it's like right here. So it would just be that area. And I don't know exactly what the shrub plantings would be.
Well, where's the
I'd be
meadow
happy
mix
with it.
going?
Yeah. It would be great if this was like a native meadow mix, depending on where it's going, and native shrub species.
I'm sure that, you know, if that's how you wanted to condition it within the jurisdiction and the other areas, you know, then if they wanted something else, they could do it that way there. And of course, the project would follow, best, you know, we would expect to be using irrigation and fertilizer, but subject to the current best management practices.
So that's something too, I mean, you can certainly condition it that way, and if they would like something different or change it, that would require a separate filing to do it.
I had asked for details on landscaping, and given what I have, I don't know exactly which plant species would, well, I sort of gave them a threshold of, you know, no disturbing in 25.
But we can condition it to our native. You know, jurisdiction, yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions or anything from the public? Okay. Don't see anything. You ready to close, Art?
Yes, please.
Jeff, do we have everything we need to close now?
Yes.
Do I have a motion to close the hearing?
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously.
Thank you. And thank you again for taking it out of order.
Not a problem, Brian.
I will just say for the record, had someone left that was involved for that, it would have stuck to the continuance, so that's why we asked if there's anyone objection, and since no one had left, we were okay.
Okay, amended orders. Monomoy Creek Road, Realty Trust at 12 Monomoy Creek Road.
And just to add to the record for this one, this was the site that we conducted our field viewing on Monday.
Sorry, I missed it. And, just to start off on that point, it was relayed to me that some TLC is necessary for the erosion control. So I'll be making some phone calls tomorrow, and within areas that may need a little bit of bolstering, we're going to add some silt fencing too, in addition to the silt sock out there. I only have one plan.
Yeah. I'm like, maybe have someone walk around and get like the insulation that's in the wetland
Yeah,
out.
I heard that there was some material coming around.
Yeah.
For record, Brian Madden from LEC Environmental. The amendment request before you, I'm just going to walk through some of the updates. The proposed pool, patio, fence, and boathouse have been reconfigured, new dimensions associated with it. That is all proposed out here, outside of the 50-foot buffer zone. And some additional changes include minimal adjustments to the foundation of the structure, basically to account for final dimensions of window wells, as depicted on the plan. The other change involves reducing the size of the parking area. In this location right here, it was a little bit larger previously. And a previously approved shed is being replaced by a garage right here in this location. 168 square feet of that garage is within the 50-foot buffer zone to the top of the coastal bank. It is located greater than 50 feet from the bordering vegetated wetland, further to the north here. But if you recall, the coastal bank is equivalent basically almost to the driveway edge in that location. So the proposed garage is separated from the resource area by the existing driveway. So we have made the argument that it wouldn't be an adverse effect on the resource area. And there's no changes to the limit of work. It's all within the previously developed construction footprint. That basically summarizes the updates.
Any questions for Brian?
What is the distance of the garage
To the top of the bank, it's
Yeah.
41 feet.
You couldn't just, I mean, you've
Couldn't
got a
just
little room
tweak
back
it?
to the other 50-foot buffer. You couldn't slide it back a little.
Yeah,
Seems to me.
kind of. We took a look at that, and ultimately, what was relayed to me is if the garage slides a little bit further down to the south, it's either going to force the parking area to shift further to the south, and that will get into the 25-foot buffer zone, and/or you're flipping the parking area within the 25-foot buffer zone where it currently exists, and that was the area that we're proposing to restore once the gabion wall is removed and revegetate that whole footprint. So with the fact that that driveway is coming in, we did take a look at the alternatives for that, and given the location in the presence of that existing driveway, we felt that it wouldn't be an adverse effect on the resource area.
Any other questions, or what do people think about that?
I will point out too that based on the pre-existing conditions, the project still results in a net decrease in 340 square feet of structure on site. And then the structures were moved further away from the resource areas originally, and even through the first amendment, we did consolidate that limit of work even further, and proposing to renaturalize some of the previously approved limits of development.
You guys have not been very conscientious on this site about taking care of the wetland boundaries, et cetera. The impacts that have gone on this winter with our heavy rains and things like that are probably pretty large.
Yeah, I mean, I've only been out of the site a couple of times, and constantly reminded the contractor maintain the erosion control barriers. I think
It's like everything is stored on the very edges, as close to our buffer zones as possible.
Is there anything in particular, Jeff had mentioned some propane tanks, anything else you'd like to move out of the way?
I think it just needs to be generally cleaned up. There's like a dumpster right by this wall, but then there was a bunch of debris and stuff over here
Looks
as
like
well.
they took a lot of the fill from the site and just pushed it all out to the edges.
Yeah.
They just got rid of all that stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. I know there was some stockpiling going on as the foundation for number 10 was being constructed. I don't know if that has been backfilled just yet, but it was relayed to me that was pretty imminent. I plan to go out there probably on Monday to do my own inspection and kind of address some of those tidiness issues.
Any public comment? Yeah, Ms. Malden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Emily Mullen, the Nantucket Land Council. I haven't been out to the site for a while, but I just wanted to, hearing about the erosion control issues out there, remind the commission that this was the site that a number of months ago I brought in some photos of that a neighbor had taken of dewatering that was taking place directly into the adjacent wetlands. And I'm sure that that's not going on anymore, but there clearly have been some issues on the site with taking care of those boundaries and the limit of work. And that's pretty concerning. It's obviously a pretty sensitive site, and I haven't seen the erosion control issues. Sounds like you guys just did, but certainly if you're being asked for an amendment to the order and it involves a structure within 50 feet, I certainly think it would be within the commission's ability to say we want to hold off until you get the site properly, have the erosion control the way it's supposed to be, and clean the site up if that's a concern and you feel like the current order is not in total compliance. Then I think I just wanted to put that out there because of the concerns with the site previously. This is an opportunity that you have to actually force them to establish everything appropriately.
I'd say too, that may be something that, if that's a concern that we've seen and want to deal with, some sort of regular, photo reporting that's required, where every, 2 weeks they have to provide some sort of site photograph that, we can inspect in between, but some sort of photograph that shows that their siltation controls are in place, is something that can do. I know it's kind of I don't feel that's an overwhelming burden on someone who's there to do that.
No, and I can certainly prepare a summary report based on my site inspection next week, and I can propose to have those measures in place by the end of next week.
Get equipment and things out of the 25?
Well, yeah, just to clarify on that, obviously it's a tight working quarters over here. As long as the erosion control is functional and it's containing any sediment, I haven't been out recently, but if there is stockpile of material or equipment close to the resource areas, is there just a desire to move that as far away as possible? As I don't think there was anything in the orders that specifically prohibited that, but I can understand that.
I would say just
closer.
to summarize some of the thoughts from the field, and I don't want to speak for the commission, but to get those siltation measures back in good repair, and really just to pick up the amount of loose debris that was just around on the site. That's not, trash that's not in a dumpster or put away, or stuff that was just free to move on the site without any effort. Wind or stuff that was there just to, I'm saying keep it neat and tidy, but the more stuff that's loose is the more stuff that can move into resource areas, especially when there's a stockpile of debris next to a 10-foot drop-off that goes right into a vegetated wetland with nothing in between those two objects.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll continue to the next meeting, and then I can have a summary report, get everything in good working order. That was supposed to be the case before this meeting, but the message got lost in translation.
Okay. Anything else before we continue? In that case, unless I hear an objection from the commission, we'll continue this to the 29th.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Brian.
If you want, when you come out to do that, if you want to schedule it with us, we'll send somebody with you to take a look at it. After, yeah.
Okay.
Or before, too. We can do both.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, this takes us to the public meeting, certificates of compliance. For Saratoga LLC at 14 Tennessee Ave. Oh, that's continued, I'm sorry. Marcillo at 271 Hummock Pond Road, it's a reissue.
Sure. So we have a couple. Brian needs to dig them out.
And the other one,
A couple reissues. They're older. So you can see that one's SC 48 936. That are just being recorded to clear title. They've been issued before, and the sites, and this goes for all of the reissues, are still in compliance. They just need a recordable recordable certificate of compliance. So I could recommend all of the reissues be reissued, but we'll just take them one at a time, I guess.
Okay, so I have a motion to do the reissue for Marcillo at 271 Hummock Pond Road.
Motion to reissue.
All in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously.
Here's the first one.
Okay, now do I have a motion to do the reissue for Bartlett at 271 Hummock Pond Road?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Well, Jeff, would it screw up your bookkeeping if we just go do the last reissue?
It's fine with me. Terry's the one that's going to be mad.
Oh, well, we'll just do them in order then. Let's just keep it, we'll just pop down the list.
Oh, sorry, it got added late because it was a reissue.
Well, we'll wait, then we'll just do it at the end. Sabaruka at 45 Easton Street.
Oh, we're actually going to Vero Ventures.
Oh, I'm sorry, Vero Ventures at 18 Cherry Street.
Yep, so this was for the construction of a single-family residence on that site. A little bit of regrading in the backyard. This is next door to one of the NIR facilities maintenance plants. I would say it actually came out pretty nice. But the site is in compliance and the work is all completed. All of the soil is restabilized and is much improved from what it was. So I would recommend that that could be issued without any ongoing conditions.
Okay, do I have a motion to issue the certificate for Bureau Ventures at 18 Cherry Street?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Okay, now Zabaruka at 45 Easton Street.
So we're at 45 Easton Street. This was two buildings that were raised to flood elevation, and then the only new parts of it were to add on a couple patio extensions, not patio extensions, porch extensions and extra stairs to make the new elevation. The grades have remained the same, and I would also recommend this one could be issued as it's a site in compliance.
Do I have a motion to issue for Zabaruka?
Motion issued.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Okay, Goldberg at 156 Orange Street.
All right, if it's okay, Mr. Chairman, I'm just going to describe the two at the same time. The one project was the project tied to the neighboring lot is it's Michael Backman's old lot that the land bank bought. They removed the house, and the one order dealt with the shifting of the walkway and the dock over solely onto private property and away from being split down the property line, and then a small addition on the back of the house as part of that. The other order dealt with reconfiguring the stairway to get it off of the split property onto their lot in the front and a new retaining wall to get the stairs to get down to the existing driveway. Both projects are in compliance, and neither of them had any real ongoing conditions that are necessary. And as a little bit of an aside, the area that had been disturbed for part of the dock last time we were out there at the end of last week is starting to show a little bit of regrowth of the Spartina in that area. So that was encouraging to see that was in spots was returning. Since last time we were there, it was a giant patch of mud.
That's
So
right, yeah.
hopefully it stays. I know the creeks with tidal fluctuations and stuff can sometimes get funny, but it was at least attempting to regrow. So with that and no one trampling it anymore, hopefully it will stay.
So do I have a motion to issue the two certificates of compliance for Goldberg at 156 Orange Street and at 156 and 158 Orange Street?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Okay, Son at West Mycomet Road. This is a reissue.
Yes, this is another one. The site is still in compliance and just looking to clear title. And I do apologize for this one being late to the party here, but if it's one that requires inspection, we'll usually carry it over. But if someone's looking for a reissue, we'll take them a little bit later, since there's no work. We'll go out and look, but no real work or things that go with it.
Okay, do I have a motion to reissue for Son at West Mycomet Road?
Motion to reissue.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Okay. Orders of conditions. The first one in our little packet here is for Pacamo Neighbors at 47, 53, 55, 57, 61, 63, 67, and 69 Pacamo Road.
All right. I apologize for the language, the draft of this one, but I was trying to get everything in it from my instructions for a positive order last time. So it's very similar to the ones we've issued for 48 Shimo, with a couple differences. the condition 30, that we can, after the discussion, since we're doing invertebrate sampling for the project, we've essentially set up that I don't think construction is going to happen right now because of time of year restrictions, but they can certainly do the sampling. So we've put this condition 30, that the first invertebrate sampling, so we have an idea what's going on in the beach, take place before they start construction. So they should be able to do that really at any time now, as it's been warm for a while and things are moving around. And that they need to do those from all of the locations that they outlined. So there's, those who don't remember, there's 3 within the project area, and then 2 to the east and 2 to the west outside of the project area that they'll be doing work on. 31 is new as well, and this was from their narrative. I just wanted to memorialize it, that the project will be deemed a failure upon 50% of the project materials needing to be replaced over 2 consecutive years. Should this occur, the applicant shall file to amend the existing permit or file a new notice of intent to modify the existing project or permit its removal. So I was hoping that that condition was from what they had put, but listening to the concerns that have been raised last time about having to replace it all the time, that was a way to say, well, we've replaced it a lot, it's time to regroup and either think to remove it or deal with it.
When we say project materials, does that
I
mean
would
like 50% of the sand cover, or are we talking about the core rolls?
I would consider personally the project materials to probably be more relative to the actual structure that's there. I mean, the sand material is something that's supposed to go away and get replaced. So we can discuss that. I guess I wasn't very clear when I put it, but. And then, real quick before we get to that, and then number 32 was something that was kind of a lesson learned from this Concept Bluff project, that we're just going to require mean high water to get staked out, and that everything has to stay on the landward side of that, but at least gives us a spot to go out and look, so there's no question if machines are traveling or something's going on where it is, especially for a site so big, understanding that there are going to be times where those stakes are probably going to be in water, especially because it's going to take a while to construct. But it at least gives us somewhere to go out and view, or the public to view what's going on and be able to see clearly where it is and where it's marked. And I'm not concerned where we're on the east shore that they're just going to get washed out. The velocity just isn't there. But we'll at least know where it is so we can make sure that machines aren't traveling or work's going on or material stockpiled in that area.
Do we have a requirement that they report the amount of sand that they provide on whenever they replace sand on the project? We should get a report to how much they applied and that sort of thing. Is that just part of the reporting requirements? Just to
I remember
start
putting
keeping track?
something like that in, so make
Is
sure.
it 22?
22, and then the nourishment is also
Oh yeah, go 23.
in 23 as well.
Let's say it's
I think we could add to that 23.
Something
That-
about volumes.
You could add a sentence at the end that says a yearly report, or part of the yearly report shall include quantities installed.
Okay.
But I do agree with Ashley that number 31, maybe to clarify that would be helpful. You may also ask, I mean, that was something that the applicant had proposed. You may also ask if they had any clarification to what they had intended by project materials. Would be a fair question to ask, but you guys can certainly also make that determination.
Yeah, I was trying to think about this over the last 2 weeks about what demonstrates failure. I did a lot of reading about never using success with these projects because it's defined by so many different things. But if we're trying to establish dune, I mean, I would say we want 60% survival of those grass species from year to year.
Right, I mean, this is supposed to be a bioengineered structure, so.
Right.
So not to hop in, condition number 29 actually requires a 75%
Yeah.
success, or they have to come back to the commission. So I do tend to agree, because it's something that, putting this together, I thought a lot about too, is I don't think these structures, especially since we're seeing them more, are as easily evaluated as what sand is coming or going. You can't look at them together. You got to look at the components separately for what's working and what's not working, and what can be done to deal with those things.
Right, and
So,
we're looking at a very important interface between the terrestrial world here and the aquatic environment of our harbor, and it's like, to say that we're bioengineering this to not impact the way it works naturally is a pretty bold statement.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see like sort of a date of, you know, a success date of sorts. I mean, maybe come in front before the permit runs out, and we can assess whether or not it can continue. I mean,
yeah, so in the conditions, again, I apologize for there being so many, one of the conditions requires a yearly face-to-face
Yeah.
with the applicant in here. And I think the intention when I had written that and included it here was to be sure that the commission was satisfied with what was happening on at least a yearly basis for what was going in, what was the work involved, how feasible is this to maintain, what are we seeing long-term. So at the end of 3 years, or at the end of even 2 years of it being in, if there's something that needs to be ordered to be done or suggested to say we need to amend the permit and extend it to deal with these things, to get it in here as much to do that, because I don't think a regular monitoring report for something like this
Right.
works.
yeah, I mean, we're gonna probably see a lot of these, so
Yeah, because I
we're
mean,
gonna
they
see if they're
say,
really worth dealing with.
right.
Are they any different than just, you know, rolls? So,
What if we want to do a kind of a partial certificate of compliance upon construction again, and then sort of leave the final certificate of compliance for the end of the 3 years to see if this thing is working before we see it's compliant?
And I think working, again, is like, it's a broad term, because we're trying to bioengineer a dune that's not going to impact the system. And I don't know, Ben may have an opinion on this, like, generally said, like, within 3 years, our plants should be taking hold for themselves. So if
Yeah, I
at
mean,
3
that's
years we've had significant percentage loss, it's failure out
Well,
here.
then at
We
5
could
years,
not
they-
establish the habitat.
right, this is not doing what it
Yeah.
was designed to do.
And the other options, and I know
Yeah, not
Maryland's,
just for what remedial action is needed to return the structure. but
right, it's time to
that should
remove
play
it.
into the failure criteria.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because step one is no, we put nothing in, we do nothing. Because there isn't a serious house under threat. You know, and the second option would be move structures. And we're jumping to the, you know, the third option already.
Right, well, yeah, I mean, we're experimenting with something new that obviously, is, you know, got structures that, and our regs aren't protected, so.
Well, and again, we, again, in my opinion, erroneously declared these things to not be structures, and so it's a kind of a weird.
It even should have more criteria because it's bioengineered. You know, it's a living thing.
Well, and how long did they say? Like after 5 years, they expect those tubes to rot?
5 to 7.
5 to
7.
7.
But the idea is the tubes rot, but the plants.
Plants
are-
stay.
Plants stay, yeah.
They take over.
So that's the idea.
So my, yeah, I mean, my, I'm sorry.
Well, no, I'm just, what I think Andy was saying is if, you know, you're having to add more tubes every couple of years, then it's not a it's not
Well,
a bioengineered thing, it's just a structure that keeps getting replaced, right?
Yeah,
Kind of-
Yeah,
I think that was at least the intent from them, and then when I recrafted a bit of that condition 31, was to try to say, what is it to the point where you're replacing stuff all the time?
Right.
That it's that means it's not working. I mean,
Right.
I just was having trouble getting to what that was. Just throwing that out as
Well, that's why I
suggestions.
think the general assessment, like after every year.
What is gonna be,
And
what
then
is our sort of threshold for living
Yeah.
dune, you know, that's what we have to.
Well, they're calling it a bank.
Or whatever, living bank, right? Is that 75% of the bank is now living and self-sustaining without the need for any structure?
Yeah, that's what, I mean, yeah, I mean, the sell was that and the first one was that this thing, I mean, with the video of the salt marsh, actually it was in the salt marsh, so it's not exactly the same. That the thing that sort of goes away and then nature sort of takes over.
Well, I'd like to then say, propose something to the effect like, let's see how this thing performs without giving the option of replacing the tubes. The core ones,
Maybe
can we
say
do
if the core logs need to be replaced, they need to come in with the new
Yeah, but
notice.
I feel like 5 to 7 years, it's too, like, we should know whether the plants are taking hold before then.
Oh, yeah,
You know,
we
if they've
should.
had to replace tons of beach grass every year, then it's still not doing its thing, and the plug should be pulled at 3 years.
Well, this is interesting because our naturally vegetated banks aren't holding up out there either. So, I mean, it's getting to be a much more
Yeah.
impacted environment. You know, at least in the last several years, the storm directions seem to have changed to impact that shore more than the east shore. So it'll be interesting to see how this holds up.
Until it changes again.
Yeah, until it changes again. Yeah, I mean, we don't know. It may go right back to what it used to be. In which case, then this,
They're in good shape.
yeah, they're in good shape, yeah.
There's a statement here.
We just have to remember when we condition this, and I think that's a good idea, just have to think about the language of it for a minute, is you're allowed to, under the act and under our bylaw, you're allowed to maintain your permitted structure in good repair. When you're dealing with situations like this where structures are designed to be intentionally impacted, I'm not sure that you can require them to have to come back in and re-permit the repair, but you could certainly require them to provide notice of the repair,
Which you have that in here.
what the repair is going to be and the extent of the repair. And then I think you could also lump that into the yearly report, that when you're looking for the percentage of materials replaced, that would also, you would essentially have to list the log of the replacements and show what that is to get to where you were at. I think that would be something within the scope, but I'm not sure that you could say to replace the tubes, you would have to come back and amend your permit.
Question, because the exact language would be referring to a structure, and we're deeming this not a structure. So,
Have to call it a bioengineered.
right, so is it a little different, because we're not repairing a structure?
Well, it's also that you're allowed to keep in good repair what you've permitted. It's essentially, in the example for one, it's the provision of the act in the bylaw that allows you to mow your grass. Is it allows you to continue the permitted activity in the manner that it was permitted to do. You know, it allows you to mow your grass, trim your hedges, paint your house, replace shingles. It's the same provision that allows, and not to compare it to this, it's the same provision that allows other nourishment projects to put nourishment sand down, or to replace their sand-filled tubes, or to do repairs to geotubes, or to do repairs to bulkhead walls. It's a very integral part of the act to allow people to make sure that their things are kept in good repair, because in theory, if you're not keeping it in good repair, you may be causing adverse impacts. So I'm 100% on board finding a way to get that to us and that information, but I also want to make sure that we're doing it legal-like.
And do we have, do they have to do a beach invertebrate sampling every year, or how often are we asking them to do that?
It is yearly
Yearly, okay.
from their protocol, and it's the 3 locations within the project area and 4 outside of 2 to the east and 2 to the west. And those go on every summer.
Okay.
Are we gonna get those reviewed by somebody?
We certainly can.
I think we probably should.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we
Just
have,
because the intertidal area is gonna suffer the most from the input of foreign sand.
Well, and beach traffic, and just the traffic to build these things is what's gonna kill everything out there. I mean, I don't know, somebody some time ago sent a paper around, it must have been Ian, that talked about how even just having people walking on the beach, I mean, heavily used pedestrian beaches
They can
wipes everything out.
They can recover fairly quickly from that sort of stuff, but the repeated nourishment activities, they have a more difficult time.
Vehicle traffic is really tough on the beaches. But anyway, so anything else before we vote on this? Okay. Do I have a motion to?
Well, I guess so are we not adding like a failure criteria into this?
Yeah.
It may pin us down. It may work against us, actually, if we're assessing it. It always seems when we commit to something specific, it works against us.
okay,
But
not to interrupt, but if I can make a suggestion, just thinking about it and hearing the discussion, you could probably add to a couple of the conditions. Obviously, if you look at 29, which is the if less than 75% of the plantings are living plants, the applicant shall come before the commission for what remedial action is needed to return the structure into compliance. You could add something to that to have a failure trigger to it, coming, meeting this criteria two years in a row would constitute a failure of the project. It would be very similar to what number 31 is then, where if you're replacing 50% of the project materials over two consecutive years, the project is a failure. And then the reason why we keep it open and broad is because my big fear is if we make them come in to do something like a removal and we're not addressing it with a new filing, is we may not be able to predict what the current conditions on the site may be. If there's been a major erosion event and it gets buried by erosion, we may not want them to tear it out. I mean, I try to build in as much flexibility as possible, so when 2 years comes up, we're making a real-time decision and not trying to predetermine, if that makes some sense.
Okay.
Actually, I want to look at number 29 again. If less than 75% of the plantings are living plants. That's just awkwardly worded, but I think that's right.
Or 75% plantings are living, or not living. How would you do that? Less than 75%.
I like.
It's greater than 25% of the plants.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. Yeah, they're not living.
No, that actually is right. If less than 75%,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, it's-
it just sounds weird. And then I'll add on the end, if this condition is met for 2 years, or 2 consecutive years, the project will be deemed a failure.
Okay. And they need to stake the mean high water lines so that we don't have to worry about them working over that. But
I gotta make, it just really is, that's a very selfish condition, because it makes it much easier for me to go inspect and make sure that they're
oh,
not
yeah,
past
no
it.
kidding, yeah,
So-
I mean, it's a good condition.
That was a lesson learned the hard way from a couple other projects, so.
I think that's good, Jeff. Presentation.
Well, these orders are usually kind of a work in progress.
I'm opposed to this. I just don't think I can agree to the finding that there's no impact on wildlife habitat and all these things. I just think the statements are too general and the habitat and systems are way too dynamic to say that for a project of this length and not to look at it from a whole coastline, whole watershed approach. It's looked at by, just a group of homeowners. But I think the failure criteria is important.
Okay, do I have a motion to issue as amended?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Dan, what was your vote?
No, I think I'm with Ashley on this one.
Uh-oh, we got a problem here tonight. So I have 3, all opposed. Okay, we have a tie vote, Jeff.
Awesome. So, all right, just thinking procedurally, because our instructions were to put together a positive order for this one. We have a few more days to issue because we just closed at the last hearing. So we'll have to schedule, you guys can obviously continue to debate if you wanted to, and continue to craft the order, or we could schedule a special hearing to deal with this at the early part of next week, because I'd have to get it posted to deal with. But I guess if we're going to discuss a potential order in the negative, we would need to establish reasons why it couldn't be conditioned to meet performance standards.
I'll put it out there, I just want a little more time spent on this. And I'd like to see some data. I don't know if we can get data, we can get, this invertebrate study. I'm afraid that we're not gonna get the information that's kind of critical to ensure that this thing is not gonna have any impacts,
I just think we're getting them too fast. I would like to see how the existing ones work. I mean, that's my biggest problem, and I don't know if that's not, I just am not convinced that these things will perform as promised on this beach, on this bank. That thing gets some pretty big storms out there. I mean, again, it has hit pretty hard.
Can we get together for a session on this?
We need
Next week,
number
you
7.
saying?
Number,
Yeah.
We need that, yeah.
Ian's out.
Yeah, he's off.
Hands out for this.
Yeah, he's missed
Right.
twice now.
And I'm heading out on the 26th, so.
Well, we have to have this issued before
By
the end of business on Wednesday of next week.
I'm available whenever for a special.
The selectmen are voting on people tonight, right?
So, no, that's actually next Wednesday. I double checked.
Okay, good.
Mosquito control on Tuesday, but schedule.
I'm around pretty much. I can come anytime.
So,
Can we do Monday?
yeah, I'd have to post it tomorrow, because I have to have 48 hours notice. So if I post it tomorrow, we can do Monday. We can do our Monday at normal field viewing time.
You guys wanna do that
I'll
Monday
find a
at
space.
Yeah,
But-
I'd like to. I feel like.
4?
I
Monday
feel
at 4.
4 o'clock.
4 o'clock Monday? Sure.
Here?
I'll have to find a room. I'm not sure if this room is available
Okay.
or not, but I will find a space. But before we get to that, if I have to write something else, I need to know what to write.
As far as the negative order,
that or revisions to a positive order
Okay.
that does what it's supposed to do. So I'll spare everyone the big talk because I've given it before for all these orders, but we need to attempt to condition it to meet the standards. And if there are concerns or timing concerns that you feel that could be addressed through conditioning, we need to make every attempt to condition it to work. And then if we cannot, in that course of action, we will have discussed hopefully enough to establish grounds for issuing a negative order.
Sorry to throw a curveball, guys. I just want a little more time to think
No,
about
fine.
how to
Good.
make this right if it's going to be a positive order, and I just don't think it's
Yeah, if there are specific concerns, I guess, I'll be honest, writing negative orders isn't difficult to do because you're essentially doing. So that, doing the paperwork, I just want to be sure that it's clear the reasoning why a positive order couldn't get met. Or if,
from my thinking, a positive. Just don't think we're ready for a positive order on this because it just seems like this thing can be rebuilt in perpetuity. I just don't think there's enough kind of success criteria, not just failure, but success criteria on any of these. And this is going to be this is sort of the new path that these are going to take. And
Well,
I'm just not. We
sort
haven't
of-
seen the success of any of them yet.
Sort of along those lines, though, that's what we tried to push on the East Coast is the core bags that basically get rebuilt continuously. They're out there all the time rebuilding those bags because they are designed, they're designed to leak sand and to, supply sediment to the system as the bank is, or somewhat similar. And
They're under a greater threat to erosion, though, unless I'm incorrect. Like most of these places, again, option one would be to leave it and wait till it erodes further, but also to move structures back, if that's what's happening. And I don't know that those have been reviewed.
Well, yeah, structures aren't in imminent danger.
Yeah.
So it's not a,
well, they're not
case of
even
that.
all 378.
No.
We've thrown that's beyond the pale because we've said this isn't a structure.
Right.
And we're stuck with that.
Right.
And so,
We are. That's
What concerns me is like the irregularities that are in the bank. We have these glacial deposits that clearly have contributed to our harbor and that area. You look, there's these rocky intertidal areas. That's not being matched per this. They're just getting sand. And I just don't know that there was much put into that.
well, and I guess the whole wildlife question is an interesting one. Like, what wildlife is this going to support? Depends on what all they plant there. But if it's just beach grass and a couple other grasses,
They might smother more.
they're not going to have a real diverse habitat there like you see on a bank. But the banks in this area are all fairly denuded now because they've been so impacted.
Yeah, there's not a lot there.
So I guess it's difficult. I guess, according to our local regs, at least, it doesn't say anything that bioengineering structures are not structures. They're still, we don't say, no, if you don't have X, Y, or Z, it's not a structure. So I don't know, I guess that's sort of my biggest problem is I still think these things are effectively structural because of those core logs in the back. They're hard, they're not soft, they're made out of fiber, but
Well, I think that we have to determine if these are acting as a structure. If they're acting as a structure, And if the structure is necessary, continued structure is necessary for this thing to survive,
Right.
then it's more of a structure
It's a
than
structure.
than it's a structure,
It's
right?
not a temporary.
It's not a temporary thing to get
Installation.
something established. If it's a temporary structure to get the
Plants.
bank established, that's a very different thing, and I don't think we know that yet. So it's some sort of language we have to put in that.
That's right. That's kind of like that deadline date. I mean, it's like it can only be done up to a certain date, but I don't know if that's even a legal way to. You know what I mean? The structure,
Well,
at
no,
a certain date, it's like it's done. You know.
you may be able to set up to require people to come back to do, I mean, it's a little bit of a gray area in filing as it is, and I guess this isn't the best example, but it's the best one I can think of right now, is we get a lot of requests for people to come in and do work on beach stairs. And we've always had kind of a general rule of thumb of what's repair and what is replace. You know, when you're replacing a stringer and a quarter of the treads, you're, doing a new filing to replace. If you're replacing just the 4 treads, you're doing a repair. And I think the question here that we're trying to kick around a little bit, and I think 31 was the start of trying to think of that, is what's the amount that's there that moves from repair to replace? And I think in these cases, and hearing the discussion, the hang-up isn't necessarily always the amount that's being replaced. It's also the frequency that it's taking place.
I think 2 consecutive years is too steep.
I mean, even if one storm wipes this thing out, it's not working. Like it's supposed to. But 2 years gives a fair shot.
To play devil's advocate to that too, I think part of what has to be contemplated in that as well is what was the storm that did the damage too. I mean, if you have a Category 4 hurricane that rolls through, or you have a 100-year storm, it's going to be. It's always the gray area for me because I've been trying to figure out these storm conditions now for 5 years and figure out, is it the wind and what miles per hour is it the rainfall? What is it that does it? And you don't know which the storm is going to be, because there are storms where I'm sure when I leave the office it's going to be total destruction in certain areas. It's like nothing ever happened there, and it's hard. I mean, I totally get it. It's difficult to try to figure out how you evaluate those because it's never the same. It's not the same condition over and over again, and what storm is permissible to cause damage to something if it causes damage to everything else? Should this be required to hold if it's a storm that nothing else takes damage and this does? I mean, it's difficult. That's why I'm glad I don't get to vote. I just get to talk. But is that, I mean, just thinking about that 31 and with the task here, would that percentage materials be better if it was lower than 50%?
Maybe,
And if
I was thinking 40%.
that's a little more. Yeah, 40% of this.
well, the thing is,
a lot of-
50% is a
Right.
lot.
That's a
Right, it's a
pretty
lot.
massive
structure.
undertaking, right? If you're replacing 40% of this thing.
2 years.
See, I think that's one of the other tricks with this one is it's so long. Is you're going over such an area that
That's what I said last time. It's just-
impacts can be much more localized in
Right,
certain
it's
spots.
different, it's over, it's a big project.
Well, the other issue I think we probably need to think about is going, if this is what the DEP and CZM and everybody is recommending, if this gets appealed, do we stand a chance? Are we just?
But
I Well,
Or could we
I want to
figure out
get,
a
I
way
would like to get
to a
to a
positive order
positive.
if we
I'd like to
can?
get to a positive. I just don't think it's quite there yet. I think we need to just tweak this a little bit.
That's what we're here to do.
Well,
And if we never get there, we never get there. That's fair.
So I need some time to think about it personally.
So, well, if we schedule for there, I mean, I can keep hammering away at it and see if we can't, from the discussion here, make some changes to the order and then get it back in front of everyone to review. I'll even try to get it to everyone in advance to review. I guess with that, if people have any specific thoughts in advance of that, if they send it to me and not to everybody, I can try to incorporate those as well, if that's what people would like to do, or put some thought into it.
Because the stakes are really high on this. Because we're going to see them. Yeah, it's going to be abundantly. Art, you have some clarification?
I have just a suggestion, if you, for consideration.
Sure, go ahead.
Which would be, 'cause I think from what I'm hearing, you're kind of close and it's circulating around concerns to number 31. And perhaps the language needs to be perfected, and maybe that's what you do for Monday, or maybe you can get there. But what if it had more information that said 1/3 of the total linear feet? And that way, of all of the tubes, right? So as part of the reporting, you're required to tell how many linear feet there are in total, not just the project length. And then say 1/3 of that. And I'm just trying to help maybe with some language at night.
Or we can certainly put both of them down as options and people want to see it. But I think if the language of that one is not meeting muster, at least from my end, I would at least like a chance to flesh that out a bit more from the conversation and talk about it more.
Yeah.
Because I think the big concerns that I'm hearing are frequency of evaluation, and then what is clearly causing a success or a failure, with a time cap being in place of some kind.
Can we think about, I almost just want to control somewhere where we can look at it, what happens when these things degrade? They seem to degrade after 5 years or so. That's uncovered, is that uncovered or covered?
No,
Just
it's
either
covered.
way, after 5 years. I'd like to have.
I wonder if it'll be that fast under sand
Well, that's what I'm
compared to
wondering.
being under
Cover.
soil, because there's not going to be the microbial community in sand that is present in, like good soil or something.
Well, that may be something, I mean, just thinking about that, there may be a way to have them build in some way to provide information on the conditions of the tube. I mean, obviously don't want to be digging up root zones or plants that are rooting or disturb the stuff that's there.
Well, when the tubes, if the
Can we
tubes
have
are
a-
exposed,
can we
they
have a
should
six-
report on the
Sorry.
condition of the tube.
Yeah. Can we have a success sort of criterion here, like a percentage of this has to be remain sort of under no repair at all, and so we can look at it to see in 5 years if this thing is a success, at least partially.
So no touching of the coral.
So like, I'd like to just
nourish-
see if this thing's gonna work with no input somewhere. Because otherwise, I don't know if we're gonna be able to find out if it really can.
If they're not meeting the criteria of
Well, I
the
guess,
project, if they're not maintaining it.
I think, the purpose of this thing is to create a vegetated coastal bank. And under these coastal conditions, as we see, our naturally vegetated banks in these areas are not holding up either. And, you know, so part of this would be to be able to come in and reestablish vegetation. And what they're trying to do is, I think, create that template there that they can rebuild the bank on. And, you know, to provide a slope, they're trying to provide a slope which should, you know, diminish wave impact and stuff like that, you know, reduce energy on the lower levels.
But if it's dependent on the structure of these core logs, in order to remain a slope, then it's something very different than a bioengineered sort of self-sustaining structure eventually. It becomes a bioengineered slope that
Becomes a
has
garden,
something in
yeah,
front of
it
it.
becomes a gardened bank, you know, and it's like not performing on its own.
I wonder if there's some way to include in the monitoring some sort of, this may not be the right word, but some sort of, you know, bulk density of the logs behind it. You can start to see that they're breaking down for the ones that have stayed in place. I wonder if there's some way to do that. I don't know how you do that.
I don't know how they'd evaluate the fiber without ripping it apart to evaluate it.
I think you'd have to
I
dig in
don't want
to
them
see.
to do that.
Let's have them install PVC
It
and
just-
take the cap
You know,
off.
Concerns me, it's so much
Flats.
focus on like the look and appearance of the bioengineered area and not what it's doing to the intertidal area right in front, you know, and the beach as a result.
Well, they have monitoring.
Yeah, there was something.
There's monitoring for that.
Yes, but
I mean, maybe we need to back that up.
yeah, this is like a little bit off, but like when you're doing an eelgrass survey, you're looking for every little area that there might be a blade. And we have this huge project area, and it's like we're sampling 3 little spots and saying that those are gonna reflect the impact for the whole area.
Maybe we should increase the sampling areas. And then you got,
We could start with a higher number, and then if they're coming out the same,
yeah,
then if there's no difference, you know, between the areas, then we could reduce it back to a couple if it appears that there's not a lot of variation. But that's always the case when you're doing sampling out in nature, is there's so much variability. And it can actually work against people to do fewer, because if they happen to just by chance hit a couple of bad
Bad
spots,
spots,
they
yeah.
can look really bad, when
Can't
in
have
reality
that.
it's not that bad, so. We could have a little more sampling.
I mean, that may be something that, you know, they're doing the 3 spots through the area there. If we're talking about just the invertebrate sampling for that portion, that you may be able to couple those up with the transect areas that are established, because then you at least know where they are. And there are more of those that run through the project area. I mean, I guess the question is, you know, when you get the information, you're looking at it, what are you going to be able to do with it when you have it? I mean, even having a professional come in to give a third-party review of what they've had getting done is what that leads to. And that's always my question with conditions that I try to answer is, when you get
What do you do with the
the result, what do you do with
Well,
it?
well, we can actually, I mean, depending on how they're surveying the biodiversity of invertebrates in that area, you'll be able to see if there's a decrease, you know, or a change.
Yeah. But I also always say too, with all of these things, you also need to be prepared if for some, whatever reason it comes to be, that the control areas outside show a decrease and the area inside shows an increase. That-
Yeah, then,
You have to be kind of prepared for all scenarios for this. I mean, is that for what you're going to get? Because it's still, in its nature can be a little unpredictable.
Yeah, it's
So-
kind of hard to find non-disturbed areas up on that shore that doesn't have a bulkhead or a wall already, you know, it's.
Stairs.
Yeah, maybe it's an actively eroding area too,
Yeah.
for the length.
At least there is plant material in the stuff that erodes, so there'll be more biomaterial in the bank here when it does erode. If that's a good thing, I don't know.
Um,
Yeah, I really guess what I want to know is this thing acting like a bank, or is it really the core tubes that are
Mm-hmm.
holding, you know, sucking it up?
That's just what I
Right.
can't get past. I just can't get past it. I can't. I'd like to, I don't know if there's a way that we can, put a timeline on that, you know? And this thing is constantly has to be rebuilt.
I mean, that's our normal thing. If you allow somebody to give them a waiver to put a structure in the 50-foot buffer, they're not gonna take it out after 3 years, you know, it's there. And,
You know, I think I'd be more comfortable if we took that down 50, you know.
I will say, if this was in front of pre-78 homes, I would say it's probably one of the better designs as far as a protection for a pre-78 home, you know?
Right.
But,
But this is setting a pretty significant precedent.
yeah, to say that you can put it anywhere.
Yeah.
And we're basically riding off natural bank on that whole shore. Anywhere that these things would hold up, maybe even on the east shore, I don't know. Because you could see these things being sort of expanded and buffered up and
Yeah.
piled up on the east shore too.
Well, I guess just thinking about that one in some language for number 31, maybe if we dealt with a lower percentage on that and explored the option of going by a linear foot look even, if part of that at the end said that the third presentation to the commission, something that when they come in for the yearly report, that the third time that they come in to the commission, I'm just trying to think of the right way to put it, the commission will at that point allow for the structure to continue. I'd have to figure out a nice way to put that. It's not a very nice way to put that, without it being challenged. But I think I see, or I think I'm understanding what the question is better now, where we're looking for some way at the end of a set period of time to say, let's continue for another year. And then at the end of that year, say, let's continue for another year. Keep in mind that at any point, I mean, this is one thing that I don't want to get lost on anyone. If the structure isn't performing or it's clearly having an adverse impact, even though it's received a permit, if that impact is clear, it's still subject to regular enforcement. So that tool never goes away. Even, let's say, it receives a permit and we're 15 years down the road, that enforcement is still possible. I mean, in theory, in 15 years, this thing would be a vegetated bank with nothing behind it other than material and plants.
Jeff, could you ask Mr. Pucci if these things have ever been tested in court to see if they are a structure or if they're a non-structure anywhere else?
I've actually talked to George about this, and George has said that at this point, this particular structure has not, but also with coastal zone management and DEP guidance saying that they are not coastal engineering structures, that he tends to believe that that opinion would carry significant
Probably
weight
carry huge
in
weight.
court
Yeah,
proceedings.
right.
So
I think
I hear that.
Is-
Clear. Yeah, I hear that loud and clear. That's the whole reason why we're you know.
that being said, I mean,
Right.
You can still say the materials within the resource area, having an adverse impact.
adverse impacts are never
I don't think
permissible. So
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna see the adverse impacts.
Right, we're not gonna be able to tell.
But we might be able to tell.
We might,
I
but
don't know what the adverse impacts would be, though.
right, I think
I don't know what
generally it would be to the underlying habitat, those things that we won't pick up on right away. We're not doing a thorough enough picture of this area.
Do we think it's going to shed more material than the bank is going to shed and therefore impact the aquatic environment?
Maybe how is this sand is gonna smother? Is it gonna? I don't know.
And will it provide the nutrients, minerals that the natural bank deposits would to the bottom of the food chain?
What is, or if you don't mind, where are the controls on this? Do we have?
What we've proposed is 7 monitoring transects,
Yeah.
so every 300 feet. And then I think the controls would be twice a year surveys. So every 6 months, every 300 feet, you're getting all of this data.
Oh, we would need some outside.
Yeah, is there any outside control areas that we can use as a comparison?
I think that gets difficult in terms of, I know some of the projects you've permitted in the past where the bottom of the bank gets located to some distance to each side. I think that the top of the bank and the other part gets difficult because it gets onto the properties of others.
Yeah.
And you might not have the ability to survey, but I think in addition, to get to that point that I don't think was included in here, that wasn't some of the other ones was, a lot of the other projects in terms of going, 1,200 feet in each direction to the bottom of the bank is typically surveying on the beach. It's not posted and it's, similar to just general access on the beach. You can always get the toe of the bank. I think getting up on the other part is difficult. And likewise, to the invertebrate part, if you would say the invertebrate studies were to happen at each of the transect locations as the administrator, then you would know where they are and you would have more of them. So maybe that would be a way to again get you some more control. And then maybe that number from 50 down to a third might be a way to, So I understand what you're trying to get at.
Is there anything pristine out there that we can compare this to from that? Is there anything?
But we should also have something about maintaining a walkable beach. Is that in here? I think any coastal project should have a walkable, kind of like what we require of SPP.
Yeah, there's gonna be some high tides that this is pretty close to the bottom.
well, I can't believe I'm going to say this because it tears my very being to say this. The difference between this project requiring a walkable beach and the Bluff project requiring a walkable beach, the Bluff project is on town-owned land, which is public
Oh,
lands.
that's right. Yeah.
This project is primarily on private lands, and the ownership of those extends to the mean high water mark. So the public wouldn't necessarily have
Right.
defined legal access above the mean high water mark. I know that sounds terrible to say, but
No, you're correct.
we can't condition public access to private lands.
You're right there.
So I would love to do that because it would make my job a lot easier to do, but that makes it a little tricky. Now, that being said, you could certainly have a condition where you looked at, and I think this would be something easy to survey, is you would look at the migration of the high water mark and shoreline change in profile outside the area of the transects, and that would even not involve any trespass issue for the surveyor to go in whatever direction they so chose. So you could look at, what's that? Yeah, but you could look at that distance and how from the bottom of the bank to the water mark was changing within the area of this structure, and then you could pick a distance to the east or to the west to show outside how that was going. The tricky part with all of these is the rest of the shore is also pockmarked with not dune guard fencing, but sand drift fencing. And there are core tubes in a couple spots. There's a whole.
We become a marsh on one end and we have Pocomo Point at the other end.
Yeah.
So what's the threshold there? You know, if the either side of this thing is retreating by what, a certain percentage? I mean, how do you? What's the trigger?
Well, the one thing that we've talked about a lot before is the percentage change relative to the surrounding areas. So if you look at how that rate is moving within the project area and the areas adjacent to it to areas that are in the similar environment that are outside, some we've never really completely gotten to an end at. But if your shoreline is migrating landward in front of this at 2 feet a year, and to the east or to the west it's moving at 4 feet a year, there's something going on. I think that's what you're looking for, is how that distance is changing relative to what's happening.
Is the idea that it doesn't change you much?
Well, I think you would like to see, yeah, I mean, obviously, you don't want to see it changing much, especially for this that's there, but you also want to be sure that the areas surrounding it are not accelerating at a rate different than the area here, or than it was before.
We need some benchmarks then, right? So we need some areas that should be surveyed ahead of this, right? So we need these.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you could put a condition that, you know, you could even do it prior to the start of construction, that survey needs to take place to have that snapshot in time before you put the machine on the beach.
Yeah.
I also have to figure out how to write that.
And you can do fairly good surveys with aerial photos for bank. They're not great, but they're.
Well, I'll be honest, this is a case where we already know that there's going to be a surveyor on the beach to do that work. We're really not going to get more accurate information than what they're going to survey.
Well, if this goes right to the property line, then there might not be surveying next door to see what's happening, but we should be looking at in-scour and stuff like that. And, you know, I don't know, I'm just thinking, given what we went through with the selectmen and stuff on the SPPF project for the appeal, and if Mr. Pucci actually thinks that this would probably not hold up to the appeal, I don't think we'd make the selectmen very happy if we force this into it. They may not even support an appeal on it. So I think that really does take us back to trying to condition this thing as best we can to give it a positive.
Well, I'll be the first to say, I mean, not to interrupt again, the whole enabling statute of the board is to try to get positive permits. And only when you realize that you can't condition it to the point where you're meeting performance standards or satisfying the interest protected, you issue out a negative order of conditions, because you just can't condition it to reach that threshold. And that's what trying to condition it to that threshold and showing the exercise of doing that, if you get to a negative order, it'll play out how it plays out. I mean, that's your job, is to do the review and analysis necessary to get there. And if DEP overrules it, DEP overrules it. If it goes to court, it doesn't hold up. I never like those. I like all of our orders to always win. But
well, I could get behind. I could get behind beefing up 31 with, as Art suggests, a third of the. How would you word that? Art, can you restate that?
I was gonna say a third of the linear footage of all the materials, but in fact, as you read it, I think we probably, we do either way, but it's worded very well by project materials, it just was 33%, because that essentially is the same thing. The project materials are the rolls, right? I mean, that's the way, that's what's measurable. The sand
The sand we
walk
expect
out
to,
and go, so that's not gonna be the project
right, we
materials.
expect to with the.
So it'd be a third of the.
No, but also plugs of grass. I mean, if they're replacing,
Yeah, we want,
Plant
and we want to have
species.
some, yeah,
Well, you got the
I think it should
75.
be the plant material and.
Well, I think 29 is
Right.
what
Right.
Vince
Right.
is
Right.
saying.
Right.
Yeah,
material.
right, right,
You're getting a
75%.
planning percentage
I
already.
think
Yeah.
that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And let's look at the coastal bank. You know, the two big things the coastal bank does is it provides sediment for the beach and including downdrift beaches.
Right.
And it's a barrier to storm, you know, to.
See, just thinking about that, and this is something I'll check with George, but that may be something too that I wonder. I think you could do that as a trigger. I'll have to double check, but I think if you took 31 and you change that last sentence, I think if you took out the should this occur, the applicant shall file to amend the existing permit or file a new notice of intent to modify the existing project or permit its removal. I think if you took out to amend the existing permit, what you'd essentially be doing is forcing them to file for a new notice, and then you get a new 3 years under an order to go forward. Because the thing that always concerns me with some of these projects is you get to the end of the permit and then you're just in repair and maintenance.
Yeah.
And it's much harder to do, obviously, if there's an adverse impact, you can go the enforcement path, which is, we know, fraught with issues to some degree. But I think if you could essentially require the filing to come in,
Yeah, after their permit is done.
then you could, if they hit those criteria, you force them to file, and at that point, you can have the discussion again, and then you're issuing a new 3-year permit to essentially get a second run. I'm not sure we can do that, but I would check if that is something that you can do. Because I know before we've required extensions to get filed with things, but I think that gets a little iffy, because also, if you run into what we just had with the Permit Extension Act, you're getting automatically extended by the governor for periods of time, and I think what we're trying to do is get shorter looks that are more substantive than what we've been getting for some of these, if that makes sense. But that may be something that's possible to do, to essentially require kind of a fresh order of conditions. So you could say, you know, then you would have a date, because your permit's going to expire to do it, or if you've hit the criteria in there to do it. But there needs to be some sort of safeguard in there too for how to review it. I'm just not sure what that is yet. But it's a thought.
Number 31, so, okay, greater than 1/3 for 2 consecutive years. So what if they lose 50% one year, the next year we have no storms, and they lose 50% in year 3? Are we still saying that's okay?
Yeah, I mean, you could just kind of skirt that on either side, and after you could still end up
We're still
replacing
replacing a
the whole
lot of
thing,
core logs.
depending on how that. I know.
Well, I wonder if you change that then to read, will be deemed a failure upon 33% of the project materials needing to be replaced in 2 out of 3 years. So then you're looking at your permit window, that if 2 of the 3 years you're doing that and not 2 consecutive, then you're having issues.
Within 3 years or something.
Because that's true. I mean, we've seen with all these that there could be a little cyclical,
Yeah.
Stagnant
where you might
around.
get
Yeah.
a year like this year, which was very storm light,
Yeah.
and then years like 2 years ago that were storms every week and just got hammered. So but we still need to also stay kind of within our permit window to some degree. But I think that would make some sense.
But what does that mean if they lose 25% one year and 25% the next year? They have to come in? Or?
Well, I think.
Yes.
You have the ability to.
They're coming in anyways for the evaluation,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, they're coming in once a year, whether they want to or not.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, or whether they met these or not. So.
And also, once this thing is in, even if the commission says it's a failure, it's years of appeals before it's out
Oh, yeah,
anyway, so
yeah.
it's
Why
there.
not?
Well, I think I'm getting closer to thinking that we're gonna.
I think there's
Well,
some.
what do you want to do at this point?
I would like to write. I think I would
Right.
rather have a
Right.
draft in
Yeah.
front of everyone that has
I think
these
that's a good
changes,
idea.
and then check on that. Essentially, forcing refilings to go forward with it. To check on that. And I think to get everyone a chance to look at this written out and not as my notes, and then trying to. It's different when, it's adding the condition for a pool than we're adding really substantive conditions for an important project.
Yeah.
Not that they're all not important.
Thanks, guys.
Again, we get 21 days for a reason, so.
Yeah.
So just to reiterate, we're meeting next Monday at 4 o'clock.
4. And I will get that posted tomorrow, and I'll let everyone know the location. I will try to get it back to here, but just in case, we'll find somewhere.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
Like the LGIs.
20th? 20th?
The good news is the other ones from here on out are much simpler.
Yeah, okay, this takes us to Paulover LLC at 165 Walnut Road.
All right, this was the gangway project where Jeff provides it's the one that's the pictures in front of Ernie. We don't really have any conditions for it. It's kind of after the fact, so it's just kind of it is what it is.
Okay. So we granted a waiver under no adverse impacts, no reasonable alternative. As long as there's room under them, I think they probably can work out. Do I have a motion to issue as drafted?
Motion to issue is drafted.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Bedell and Alderson at 8 High Brush Path. Did we end up closing this?
Yes.
Yes, we did.
We have closed everything tonight
Oh,
from
yeah,
the
that's
notices.
right.
So this is one I did have a new condition to add to number 20. That's one I've been adding, that no cultivars are to be planted in any area of restoration plantings, because they're doing some buffer zone restoration.
Is this the one on Saxon?
No.
Which one is that?
High Brush Path is the one that's out in the Hummock Pond area. There were just some areas where
Oh, right now.
the lawn had encroached that they're going to be replacing. I just wanted to make sure that they weren't. I don't know where you find cultivars of some of those species, like arrowwood or something, but I'm sure they exist.
Yeah, they
Everywhere.
exist, yeah.
So-
That's what
There's-
most people are using.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
so. But
There's a disgusting amount of cultivars on this island.
Okay, do I I have a motion to issue as amended? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Okay, Beach Nut LLC at 1A Crow's Nest Way.
All right, this was the demolition of the existing building, and then kind of the redevelopment of that property. I included our pool condition, that is not drained or discharged to the area outside the commission's jurisdiction. And then on this one, given the pool and the buildings that are there, I put on that all the exterior lighting shall be directed downward, so it's not shining into the dune or shining into the wetland. I don't really have anything else. And then I didn't put the waiver because I don't think that removing structures from the 50 is a waiver required activity. If you guys would like to grant a waiver, that is perfectly fine. But
Well, like you said, it doesn't seem necessary.
no, I think if you're putting in,
Yeah.
you would. If you're
Right.
removing,
Taking
I
out.
would be like,
You know,
please.
work inside the 50.
Yeah, because they'll be having machinery within the 50 to remove it.
I'm sure they will. But I mean, you would see that if people were doing landscaping to the 25, there's a good chance that there would be, a piece of machinery, a skid steer or something through there.
Yeah.
Okay, do I have a motion to issue as drafted?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Okay, 3 Beacon Lane nominee trust at 3 Beacon Lane.
Do we carry that?
No, that's the one that
We went back to it.
we went back.
All right, we can take
Now,
it.
heritage.
I do have one to add from our discussion for that. There'll be I would suggest the number 20. It says all plantings between the 25 and 50-foot buffer zones shall be native species with no cultivars allowed.
25 and 50.
Then obviously if they want to do something different, they'd have to come back to amend their permit to do that.
Okay. This is that one down there. Do I have a motion to issue as amended?
Motion to issue as amended.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Okay, the Leary Family Realty Company LLC at 7 Mass Ave, Massachusetts Avenue.
So this was the after the fact on the emergency placement of the well and the installation of the tight tank. I didn't really have any conditions for that. Those tight tanks come with so many conditions from the Board of Health and the state on those things that.
Seems like a great idea.
Yeah.
And considering that's the one and only tight tank zone on the island.
The funny thing about this one was like the dewatering area, right?
Yeah, there's a temporary dewatering area outside of the 100 from the resource areas, but within land subject to coastal storm flooded. But that's just to get the tight tank into the ground.
Okay, looks pretty straightforward all in all. Do I have a motion to issue as drafted?
Motion issued.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously.
I'm just happy to see another septic system go off the grid.
Especially out there, yeah, it's great to get rid of them. Okay, that's that. Anything else we need to discuss?
For orders, no.
Okay. So that takes us down to monitoring reports. Sick on wall 153 and 155 Walnut Road.
Yeah, so we put these in. If you have questions, Mr. Haynes is here. If you would like to ask, more than welcome to. If not, it's just everyone is catching up with their with their work. Yes, and reports that are slow. You don't have to take any action. It's
So
just
these
for you.
things, they came in,
Yeah.
they're
Are they getting
satisfying.
posted
Yeah.
somewhere? Or
What's that?
do they get posted somewhere?
Yeah, we're actually developing a new page where we're going to just post the monitoring reports that come in separately,
Well, that would be great.
Yeah.
outside of the chart that we maintain now for people, just to get that stuff out for people to see and not have to come into the office to do it. So
Everything.
Okay, I think.
we try. Yeah, everything looks fine on both reports that came in.
Okay, great.
We just try to give people credit for getting them in.
Yeah,
get them in.
right.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, we'll go to other business. Approval of minutes from June 1st. If there's no comments on the minutes, we'll approve them by unanimous consent. Okay, so be it, they're approved.
Thank you, Gary.
Any new enforcement actions or comments on
Oh,
enforcement?
I do have a couple before we get to enforcements. Oh, enforcements are first. I do, and I know Mr. Dale is here. I issued one out in the interim. I just wanted to get on the site as best I could to get it, and he provided some nice pictures from a neighboring property at 36 Pocomo Road. I had mentioned it last time. I was just still doing a little research where there was a very significant amount of brush cutting done, some of which is clearly within jurisdictional areas. Some of it I'm not sure is within. 6 1/2 dozen. A lot of cutting was done, and I think the pictures reflect very clearly that a lot of it was not done in compliance, and there's going to be some restoration efforts that are going to need to be done in association with that, because it's in areas that wouldn't typically be permissible. Just kind of to set the site a little bit, this is the lot that would be directly to the east of 40 Pocomo Road. It directly abuts that, and that was the project that we spent an overwhelming amount of time in the last year looking at a potential vernal pool on the inside of that resource, isolated land subject to flooding.
This is where
In the
the
area?
This is where the road was put
on
in.
36
This is where the road was
probably,
put in
right?
behind it. So this is the project right next.
This is
happened right next door.
this is an abutting lot.
And we
Okay.
couldn't go on this one to actually measure part of the vernal
Correct.
pool?
So part of the vernal pool goes onto the lot. I mean, it's of the potential vernal pool. Sorry to use my proper terms. But work was clearly done from my site, and I haven't. I've been on 36. I've been trying to meet with someone there, and we've sent it out already. But we're fairly close to what I believe to be the edge of the vegetated wetland on that lot, and significant cutting that was done in there, as well as obviously the 25-foot buffer zone. It's important to note in this case that with that being a potential vernal pool, that the setback to that for an undisturbed vegetated buffer is 50 feet for a vernal pool. So it's a much more significant buffer zone that we're dealing with. I took the liberties on behalf of the commission when, after reviewing the information that we had from Mr. Dale and then getting on the site, to issuing it out as the agent of the commission. I would like to ratify that through the board, though, but it has been noticed out, and I required some sort of restoration plan from them by the very early part of July to get them enough time to get the notice, let me know that they received the notice since we send it certified mail, and then get to the commission for what action needs to be taken. I think given in light of other recent projects that have had excessive cutting, treating these very similar is something that I think is something that's going to be very important to do, and for people to get the message that they just can't go do work without, especially on lots where they've done filings before, so there's no even chance that they possibly could try the, we didn't know there was a wetland, or on a lot where they just received notice in the last, 18 months that someone was doing work that required permitting through the Conservation Commission that we didn't want to check to make sure. So,
Did like trees come down in this case, or just the shrub?
pretty much everything came down. I mean, there are still some standing trees that are there that you can see. I do.
I know it's in like
Yeah.
a packet from boys.
Yeah, so we do have the pictures that are there. It's pretty significant and extensive. You can still see some trees that are standing in some cases, but there are definitely, and I did kick through all of the brush. Clearly some significant vegetation was taken down. I don't think there's any question to that. And there's wetlands kind of on both sides of that lot and in the back. So,
Do we know that that's been designated as a
Yikes.
pool or not?
it has not officially been certified as a vernal pool. However, I will say that every piece of evidence that was going through the 40 Pocomo Road,
I think taking these trees down is way worse than.
it walks like a duck and sounds like a duck.
Hard to say.
Well, these are wild
No.
trees at least.
I would feel comfortable jurisdictionally treating it as a vernal pool, especially in the case of enforcement. So,
Or 50, anything else?
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
don't think we can, it shouldn't have been done.
Potentially.
No.
And it was
Yes.
not just on the farm area.
so, but typically for part of this too, I think it wouldn't be completely inappropriate as part of the enforcement that for at least a portion on that property to request or require that be determined.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just wonder who's sitting on these machines saying, yep, A-okay.
Well,
Well, that's tough because ultimately it's the property owners carrying the ball. But,
They're carrying the cash ball.
well, it's their property and they should be in charge of what's done on it.
yeah. So I do need to get that ratified. If
Okay,
you
so
guys
can we
are wanting
ratify
to
the
continue.
issuance of the enforcement order for 36 Pocomo Road? Do I have that motion? Kevin. Let's hear from Kevin first.
If it's appropriate, I represent Mr. and Mrs. Robert Wright at 29 and 33 Dewey Creek Road. They're the direct abutters to this line. Frankly, they're appalled by what happened. And I think it's more than just cutting, it's clear cutting. It almost looks like a nuclear winter on that lot. And what I request is, if there's going to be a restoration plan, that it could include restoration with mature trees and shrubs, as well as grasses, indigenous vegetation, not just requiring these people to put down grass seed property. I think the trees did come down. I'll be blunt, I walked on the property, I took those pictures, and it was like walking through, a cornfield just after the harvest. The stubs about 2 inches, and everything else clear cut. It looked to me right up to the vegetative wetland. And you can see in my letter to the commission, there's a plan attached, which was a wetlands delineation plan for this 36 Pocono Road property. I know it's a few years old, but I think it's probably substantially shows you the wetland resource area on the property, the buffer zones. And there was no respect for any of the buffer zones, irrespective of vernal pool or not. Just clear cut. So again, I think a strong restoration requirement with mature vegetation and with a clear time frame for it to take place. That's what I'd ask you for.
And I would say it's typically been our past practice for vegetation restoration. I know we talked about a lot for the land bank to replace as in-kind as possible, or even the magic tree, minor modification to replace as in-kind as possible for vegetation replacement, at least in recent history. So more to come.
Yeah.
All right, so I do need to get that
So,
ratified.
we have that motion to ratify that enforcement order?
Yeah.
But just to follow up on Ashley's comment, I know we can't go after the guy that mowed it, but can we send him a letter? Like,
No, I think that's something that, as the commission, we should start doing is to come in and then just say, we have information we would like to send to whoever performed the work, please let us know, and we can have a letter that explains in very clear terms what to do, because, not to change subjects, but what we found a lot of times with the fertilizer committee, one of the things we hear is some of the landscapers are ultimately afraid that they're going to get fired, and what we've been trying to tell them is, please come to us and let us help you, because we want you guys to practice responsibly without fear of getting fired when you tell people that you have to follow the rules. That we want to be a resource for them to say and be able to stand up and say, I'm sorry, I can't do that without permits, and this is why. And then when people have a freak out, they can get a hold of me or get a hold of someone in our office and say, oh, I understand now what's required to do. So we want to be a resource for the professionals trying to do the work, but also say, you got to be smarter and look at situations and say, this doesn't seem like a good idea.
There's gotta be some sort of,
This might be a good time for, they've already had the wetlands delineated on this lot, if we can establish that.
Oh, they definitely have, there's permits from,
Then we should consider a fine in this case then, I would think.
I'm going to get to that in a minute once we finish the enforcements.
Okay.
But we still need,
so,
go ahead.
yes, so moved.
So all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries unanimously.
all right. And then
Okay.
second enforcement order for the evening. And hopefully the pictures came through for everyone in their packet. For those who don't.
Yeah, I only got the first half of the packet.
Yeah, me too.
All right, well, I'll pass them around. So for those who don't know, we do a significant amount of endangered species monitoring out on Esther's Island and Smith's Point. And for those who weren't on the commission at the time, there's a pretty significant reconstruction of the home out there. There's now that house that has all the solar panels and wind that used to have the vertical wind turbine and all of that. Our bird monitor happened to be out there and was traversing the area and took us some photos, and some of these are ones that I took with the second viewing. The owner of the property has taken it upon himself to cut a number of new roads for an off-road vehicle through the vegetation out there, all of which is jurisdictional as barrier beach. A lot of it is also jurisdictional as bordering vegetated wetland, coastal dune, coastal beach, coastal bank, and a couple other spots. Installed some structures and gates that are concreted in, has installed a new set of aluminum beach stairs and a ramp. And then, more disturbing, because I hadn't seen it because we're usually on the beach, they also have installed a few stone walkways on the property that are stone set in concrete that run from like the house to the top of the bank. And then all of this, for the most part, a couple of the roads showed up last year a little bit, but they got cut this year, and a few of these things happened in the last 2 weeks. He had this little work crew out there that he brought up from Florida, and if it's not a regular area that we just go cruising for enforcement calls, that had the bird monitor not seen it, we would have never known.
Is this all on his property, or is he spilled over onto town land?
That is an excellent question. There's no,
Maybe
the monumentation out there for, bounds or iron pipes are not very forthcoming. So I personally think that the gate that you'll see, I think maybe off his property, and the one road that runs from his house east to the point, is definitely off his property.
It's all heritage.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's all here, yeah.
So you can kind of see from the GIS, the road runs from his house, the new one, from here to here, and there are paths that run there, and then there's another road that is in a different spot. But I would just like to issue the enforcement order for that and just start that process.
Whose land would the gate be on?
What's that?
Who owns the land that the structure's on?
If it's where I think it is, it would be land owned by, that specific parcel I believe is owned by the land bank. I'll put it this way, it is not his. And it would be owned either by the land bank, by the town, by Mass Audubon, or one of the parcels in there. It's really the problem with Esther's, there's so many tiny parcels. It's still privately owned,
Right.
but that owner hasn't
Still.
been
Yeah.
Right.
present or cognizant of the land for a very, very long time.
Right. Makes more.
So, well, the ATV that they operate is more of a, like a John Deere Gator style. It's more of a four-wheel.
There's a ramp going up.
Yeah, well, I believe the ramp was installed because they transport most of their stuff, especially this time of year with vehicle closures, by boat. So they moor up their boat. They have a float out there that they rope into the shore and then haul their stuff up. And I'm sure it's the ramp. And I think even in this case, if it were properly installed and permitted, would probably be something that he could probably try to get a permit for. But you just can't go and do it because you think it's a good idea.
What are you suggesting for the enforcement?
I would just like to enforce all of the activities, and I think in this case, we're going to have to order removal of a lot of these things. But I would also like to get them in front of the commission to essentially get ordered in person what to do. We've had problems with this specific individual before with endangered species and things that they don't seem to get the message with written warnings and things that are there. I think putting him in front of everybody and making him agree and understand in person is probably going to be necessary. And I'm completely not opposed to pursuing fines for this as well. I mean, this is clearly a site where you are buying a piece of property knowing that it's a
Yeah, it's very sensitive.
an uberly sensitive area for a lot of reasons. And knowing that it's a place that came with a lot of rules and restrictions to even be built to do it. So,
So do you have a name or something for that we can reference here?
yeah, the violation would be against Charles and Terry Maurer, are the owners of the property.
Okay, so we need a motion to issue the enforcement order against the Mowers?
Yes.
So moved.
It's Maurer is Maurer. I may not be saying that right. Maurer.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously.
All right, I do have one more update on enforcement before we get to the next one. I spoke with Rachel from the Land Bank again. They're finishing up their delineation on the 290 Pulpus Road property and getting that down. And then they're, from our request, continuing to monitor any sort of regrowth or thought on the holly. But they've also been granted permission by 290 to do the plantings work and other things necessary to restore that area. So that plan should be forthcoming at our next meeting to start that work into action. So
Any growing back? I didn't out there a week or two.
I haven't seen any. I will admittedly say I haven't been out there in a couple of weeks though. So I do know holly can be somewhat slow growing, but
Yeah, no.
it's not going anywhere in the short term. So, but she at least wanted me to say that she's working towards getting the full plan together to start down the path of fixing that, for what it's worth.
Great, thanks, Jeff.
No problem.
Okay, now that takes us down to the emergency certification.
All right, let me just pull this one out. So this was for the permit that we did earlier tonight for the Erie family. You know, it feels kind of weird to have issued the order of conditions and now be issuing the emergency, but the Board of Health ordered the well installed and authorized the emergency. All we're essentially doing is trying to play catch up on paperwork and to sign off that they were allowed to do it, since it's already been done outside of the appeal window.
Okay, do I have a motion to issue the emergency order for, what was it on?
7 Mass Ave.
7 Mass Ave.
There. 7 Mass Ave.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Okay, reports. Our CPC's not here. NPMEDC,
Nothing much, a lot of transportation stuff.
mosquito control.
We meet next week, so nothing new.
Okay. Okay, commissioners' comments.
I just want to say, I appreciate everybody taking a little extra time on talking to neighbors.
Big project.
It's critical too. It's very precedent setting.
So Jeff, just a procedural question. Say it did go to court, can they still maintain it, or is it they have to stop work and wait till the decision's made? Just curious.
For,
Say there was, like Ashley was saying, if it went to court and it got held up, can they still be working on it and maintaining it?
unless, my understanding is yes, unless an injunction is filed to prevent that from happening.
Okay.
But you'd have to have grounds for that injunction.
All right.
I would really prefer to avoid that path.
No, I was just curious, like what happens if it does
Yeah,
go there? Do they
so
still
it's
keep
similar,
going?
it's a similar question to what we saw with the Sconset Bluff project, where that was installed under an emergency certification and had conditions to that, is even while it was playing out and in the appeals process for the regular permit, they were still allowed to maintain it in compliance with the emergency certification, and actually it was determined that they are required to do so to stay in compliance with that. So the way that could have stopped is if somehow you would have filed your injunction that ordered all work to cease or maintenance to cease on that, to do it. So kind of can be circumstantial, but you can definitely get it either way. You just have to, injunctions, I guess, you have to have very clear grounds on why that needs to stop. And apparently they can be very difficult to get in those cases. You have to have a very clear showing that there's such a significant impact that they have to do it. So, but it'd be the same thing if you ordered it removed, went through that process, is you probably see lots of injunctions till that played out, appeal-wise. So it can be a process for sure.
Anything else from the commission? Jeff, do you have anything
I
else?
do have a couple things really quick. As I said last time, I know we've been talking about revisiting regulations. I know this is a bad time of year for everyone, but if we want to get that scheduled, if we could get anyone's pre-thoughts, I know Ernie has sent in a couple things. Any thoughts from people on areas they would like to be covered we could file to do that and have something to start with instead of just opening the hearing to do that. Or if we wanted to do that as, instead of doing it as part of our regular meeting, just doing a couple, I'll use the selectmen's term, workshoppy meetings to just do regulations. They'd still be public hearings because they're regulation changes, but to do those separately and only focus on that. But if people send their thoughts in, it'll help us get compiled a little bit, if that's still the want of people to do. That also being said, with all the whispers of special town meeting coming up this year, which seems like it's going to be very much a reality pretty soon, with all the talk of Nantucket sewers, one of the things I would like to do is been working on the initial language for it, is to change our actual bylaw to cover enforcement and to clarify, because we've been having a little debate about whether or not it's clear enough that as the conservation agent for the town, I can issue tickets against the bylaw, or if it still requires a police officer or the chief of police. I would like to change that to be able to, if you guys authorized it to do so, be able to issue tickets against our bylaw without having to involve the police.
So moved. That would be good.
Yeah.
Like, can we deputize?
It's pretty sad that I've written more tickets for the Board of Health than I have for the Conservation Commission as the conservation agent, because it's tricky. But what we may do procedurally for that then is put the language together, get you guys to endorse it, and put it in as a warrant article for special town meeting from the Conservation Commission. And then hopefully it just smooth sails through and we won't have any problems. But it would make our enforcement process a lot easier and would also make things where, I don't want to say just willy-nilly, but if there were very clear issues of enforcement, you guys could say at a meeting where you heard from, say, well, we're going to have a restorative action, and just to start the process, for the violation, you're going to be issued your $300 fine, and we could literally issue it. So it gives us a lot more teeth. So we're stuck, by the way, to the $300 limit per violation per day.
That's gonna add up.
But they can, especially when you stack up 4 or 5 violations at a time. So, but that's something I'm going to try to put in front of you guys here in the next month, because I don't want to miss the window for submissions if it comes up. And I really would prefer to deal with this before annual town meeting. It'd be nice to get it in and done. But it also gives a lot more authority for when we say you have to have all your monitoring reports in to say, to you guys, if people don't get them in, would everyone be okay and comfortable with issuing out a $50 ticket for those not being in? We could do that and then issue it out and not have to deal with the police or make a bunch of phone calls saying, it'd be really great if you guys could get those in. It'd be awesome. Now I can say, if you don't get them in, you're going to be subject to a penalty. Here's your ticket. And by the way, I'm going to put everyone's names that get tickets in the newspaper, like the Board of Health. So that's kind of the end game to this, is to set up a different kind of penalty structure than what we have a little bit through the regulations, to say failure to provide monitoring reports, here it is. And hopefully that will spur more people into action if they know that. I know it's not a lot, but if you can land your name in the paper on occasion and even get a $50 ticket that stops you from getting building permits or anything else, it's an annoyance that is not worth the trouble. I'd rather get the report. So that's it for me, but that's kind of where we're headed.
Quick question,
with
is
these.
the public welcome to submit suggestions for regs changes?
Absolutely. The public is always welcome to submit suggestions for regulatory changes.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, I have a motion to close the hearing. Close the meeting, I mean.
For adjourn.
Or adjourn, yeah. All in favor? Opposed? That motion carries unanimously.